Hello. Welcome along. My name is Simon Jacobs. This is episode 245 of Adventures in Pop, and you are extraordinarily welcome. This is quite an interesting episode, and what I want to do is introduce and then let the interview take over. Let me explain what's going on here. I got in touch a little while ago with a guy who lives in Sydney, Australia, who is a YouTuber, and I watched one of his videos and dropped him an email. And he goes by the name of Indie Over 50, and that essentially tells you what his kind of YouTube channel is built around. And it's an interesting concept, and it's about it's about people like me. It's about people like him and people like me who are over 50. Don't tell anyone about that. That's the only bit I'm always a little bit nervous about. I think he's quite courageous, actually, to call his channel Indie Over 50. I'm pretending that, I'm indie under 30, but it's not going to wash, is it? So his channel is all about the trials and tribulations, but also often about the kind of what he calls the superpowers of the people over 50 who are throwing themselves into making music in whatever way, with whatever means, whether it's solo or in a band, doesn't really matter. It's about people of that certain age group trying to make some headway in this, tricky music industry. And all I will say is, even if you're young, gorgeous, and extraordinarily talented, it's still very difficult to break into the music industry. If you're none of those things, it's obviously a lot harder, as I'm constantly finding. So I got in touch with him and said I would be really delighted if at any time he wanted to chat or do something more formal, like record an interview. And about a week ago, he came back to me and said, "Hey, how about an interview?" So we went ahead and we did it on Zoom. A few technical issues to begin with. We had to, work out how we were going to make this all kind of connect. Obviously, there's a big time difference, but you don't need to worry about that. What we have here is basically this guy, John, based in Sydney, as I say, going by the name of Indie Over 50. I will leave links so that you can go and have a look at his channel, go and investigate John in your own time. And in fact, a long form of this interview, it will be out on his channel probably later on this week. So I think I'm slightly jumping the gun by getting in there with what I'm calling part one. It's a long interview. It's about an hour. So I've cut it up into 3 parts. And what I'd like to do is introduce part 1 for you now. And we'll come back to parts 2 and 3 a little bit later this week. So stand by, you're going to get all 3, but we'll start with part 1, which makes sense, doesn't it, really? And I hope you enjoy. It was from my point of view, it was a real pleasure. On 2 counts. One is it was just a real pleasure to catch up with somebody who is in the same kind of space, doing the same kind of things, and frankly having very similar experiences about what works and what doesn't, what causes the headaches, and some of the kind of ways that we go about trying to mitigate the fact that we're indie over 50, as well as celebrated, of course. So it was pleasurable from that point of view. The other thing is, it's just quite nice spending ages just talking about yourself. I don't get that many opportunities to do it, so I rather leapt at the opportunity, and once I get talking, boy, I can talk. Anyway, I'm going to hand over actually to John, who's going to introduce this with a lovely introduction, by the way, and then just let you watch the first 20 minutes, and we'll come back with part 2 a little bit later this week. You take care now. See you later. Bye-bye.
Putting out music as an indie over 50 artist, it is an adventure, right? It's the adventure of pop. And today's guest is the adventure of pop man. It is Simon Jacobs. Now, Simon came to my attention through Indie Over 50. He reached out after one of the videos and was able to share some of his music, and we actually put it up on our YouTube, Spotify playlists and the Spotify playlist. But what I've actually learned about Simon is, as well as being a wonderful songwriter and singer and producer, is In this journey, he tripped and fell into becoming a YouTube artist. And in fact, as well as his success with music of over 2 million Spotify streams, something that is unimaginable reach for many of us as indie over 50 artists, he has now amassed over 190,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce tonight's guest on Indie Over 50, Simon Jacobs.
That's a lovely introduction. Thank you very much.
Simon, welcome to Indie Over 50.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, where are you in the world right
Oh,
now?
no, it's a good question. I'm in West London. I'm in Hammersmith, West London. I've been living in this same house for about 30 something years, which does suggest, a certain age. So yeah, I've been here forever and ever. And it's a really nice part of London that I'm, quite mixed in every way, in terms of class and race and what people do, and so it's good. It's a nice part of London. And actually, I love London. So I mean, I feel very much a Londoner.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be able to connect with you today, and also to place you in that beautiful place that you've established for yourself in West London. My question now is, indie over 50, by definition, often the artists we fall in love with are the artists we grew up with. But my challenging question for you is, who's your favorite artist of the 21st century?
21st century is, yeah, I was, yeah, struggling with this one. There's a few. I would say at the beginning of the 21st century, probably Rufus Wainwright, because I loved his early albums, Want One and Want Two, which were right at the beginning of I think it was 2003, 2004. And to me, those are two really sort of precocious pop albums that are incredibly ambitious. It doesn't all work. I don't think everyone likes his voice. I went to see him live quite a few times, and his voice is a bit of an acquired taste for some people, but I was just, I mean, I really love kind of sophisticated, clever pop music, and I just thought that's where he is, in particularly at the beginning, and he's now strayed into opera and pretending
Right.
to be Judy Garland and all kinds of things. But those early albums I thought were fantastic and quite influential. Then on the other hand, Frank Ocean is the other great sort of love of the 21st century. But he's so enigmatic and elusive, and really there are only two albums and a mixtape. And so, for the whole of his career, there isn't much to go on yet. So I'm frustrated with him. I want him to, hurry up and release more music.
Well, it's wonderful to be introduced to a new artist, to a Frank Ocean. So I'll include that link below, and I'll go and discover him myself as well.
Yeah, I think both his main albums, Channel Orange and Blonde, are fascinating, and I think he's deeply loved by the people who love him. I mean, it's a real. There's a community out there who absolutely adore him and spend their whole time speculating on whether there's another album coming soon, because
Yeah.
it's been a good few years. It's been 6 or 7 years since the last album, and it's driving everybody crazy. And then there are I would say, if somebody asked me a slightly different question, which is what are the great sort of, individual tracks of the 21st century, I would probably go to Rihanna, and Diamonds. It was written by Sia, I think, and I just think that is a completely fantastic song. As an individual song, I just think that has got everything.
And an
Um,
amazing songwriter, Australian songwriter as well.
Yes, she is. I think she's a fantastic songwriter. I think she's come unstuck recently with her film that nobody liked, but other than, put that to one side. I didn't realize that I had already heard her when I was listening to Zero Seven albums at the beginning of the 21st century, but she's featured on those, and before she became a solo artist and a
She, yeah,
songwriter.
purposely, took herself backwards for or out of the limelight for a long time. Yeah.
Diamonds by Rihanna, I think, is sensational. And there are not, there every now and again, I'm still struck, even at this age, by just a great pop single, and I think, that's good. Those moments get a bit rarer. I think, when you're younger, you'll hear something that takes your breath away far more often than I think at this age, where sometimes people will enthusiastically play you something, and you say, "Oh, well, that's exactly like this that I like from years back," and they just roll their eyes and think, "Oh, well, you know, that's very tedious for you to say that." But
Well, the challenge, well, for Indie over 50, we've got a long heritage to draw from now because, rock music and then through its various iterations is now 70 years.
mm,
So, yeah, when we were growing up, we would never listen to music that was 70 years old.
no, absolutely not. That was the whole
That happened.
point, was to not do that, wasn't it?
That's right. So, in fact, on that note of time travel, I'm going to ask you, what was your first time? What did you spend money on
Yeah.
first in
This is
music?
this is a really good question, because I've asked this question of other people. It's not about what did your auntie Gladys buy for you, which you didn't like, but the one that you went out yourself with your
Hard earned.
hard-earned money. I bought my first ever single was Wall Street Shuffle by 10cc in about 1973 or 4. And I loved 10cc, and I loved Sparks, and these were all slightly, slightly on the edge, slightly avant-garde pop music, basically
Mm.
from the 1970s. I loved. I kind of grew. My older sister was buying Sweet and Slade records of that very bubblegum
Yes. Yeah. A
glam
big
rock era
glam rock.
where they all looked just extraordinary. I remember, and I used to watch Top of the Pops you know, with absolute regularity. It was compulsory for me. And there were often things on there in the early 70s that did really blow me away. And so 10cc and Sparks, definitely. And then seeing Freddie Mercury for the very first time singing Killer Queen on Top of the Pops with Queen, that was another moment where I just thought, this shouldn't be allowed. It's so exciting. This looks dangerous, and I'm watching,
Mm.
and quite often things, the BBC would get away with stuff on Top of the Pops, where you look back at it now and you think, "Oof, that was pretty close to the edge," and sometimes I think the general public didn't quite realize how subversive it was, and I loved that.
It was a really progressive time, and rock was, as you say, it was a new outlet. It was a new voice of a new generation, and you're right. There was always boundaries that were being pushed. As you went from rock to hard rock, from pop to new wave, all of those were new boundaries. And then even in the presentation on TV and the performances
Mm,
themselves,
mm.
it was all the development of the art. So it was a great period to live through.
Yeah, and in the 70s, I loved David Bowie, um, Paul Simon. And I think I started developing a love for, well, two different strands really. One was kind of the great songwriters. Paul Simon, Leonard Cohen, Elton John, Randy Newman, even. I liked all of those, particularly American great songwriters. I fell in love with things like Jimmy Webb. I'd never heard of him, but I found various bits, and I realized they were all being composed by the same person. So Wichita Lineman from the 60s,
Mhm.
and MacArthur Park and the Highwaymen and stuff. So all of that, I remember just thinking, these are extraordinary pop songs. They're a little bit outside the mainstream, and they're really sophisticated. And then the other thing I really loved was harmonies. So I loved basic Black American vocal groups, because they were
Mm.
just astonishing. I loved the shy lights and the stylistics, and
Yes.
as a teenage boy, I think that made me a little bit odd, because my friends were definitely into Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, progressive rock. That was what boys of my age were supposed to be listening to, and I was listening to the Shy Lights, the Stylistics, Sparks,
Intonation.
10cc, and David Bowie and
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, I think that distinctive, element of harmonies is something that's actually really core to your music, that I hear today. And I think that probably just is a useful segue to prompt and ask you about your musical journey. We've heard about that influence by those great groups and harmonies, but tell us about your musical journey and when did you get
Yeah.
into music?
Okay. So I think in my teens I played the piano. I learned the piano, so quite formally learning classical stuff on the piano. And what I remember is when my parents went out, and I used to really like it if they went out and left me. I was supposed to be doing my piano practice. As soon as they literally shut the front door, I was trying to play songs that I'd heard on the radio on the piano. I wanted to try and translate what I was hearing. And I found that with a bit of practice, I could sort of play by ear and I could start working out what the chords were. I had enough kind of music theory understanding to just really basic to know, that that's a C, that's a D, that's a D minor, etc., and work it out. Um, so I could kind of play by ear, and I reckoned, I think then I thought that everybody could. I thought this is just something that everybody did, and I was a bit surprised to find that not everybody had that same thing. But so that was really helpful. So I started playing ABBA songs on the piano, and then gradually it would get a bit more sophisticated. ABBA was like, basic, but I loved it. Um, and it got more sophisticated. And then I think it wasn't a very big jump from doing that to thinking, what if I put my own words to this? What if I try my own melody? And it was all piano based, and it was all very teenage. So, it's not something I wouldn't want to go and find those songs now, particularly because I think they were very angsty
Hmm.
teenage things all on the piano, mostly broken-hearted, etc., etc. I mean, I don't know where I got the words from, but they're all very, very sad. So it
But
was
aren't they the anthems? Aren't they the anthems that we love?
probably, and I would play them to a small number of people, a little bit, bit shy about being the center of attention, but gradually thinking, okay, well, that's okay. Then when I went to university, I met up with somebody who also wrote songs, and so we formed a kind of a partnership, and that became really important for years and years. So there were two of us. We formed a band. We decided we didn't like a band, so we unformed the band again and just became two of us in a recording studio for years and years and years, just recording and recording. And the great shame about that is that we recorded tons of stuff and finished very little. I think um, there was an element of sort of perfectionism. If it wasn't absolutely perfect, it sort of got discarded, and we were terrible about this. And so,
Did you
years
reach the
later,
Did you reach the limits of the technical, the capability, or was it the limits of the finances to
it
to
was
to
it was
finish?
okay. That's a very good point. Yes, I think sometimes we just ran out of. It was really expensive. We had to go and hire studio time. We found a sympathetic engineer who didn't mind that we would take forever, composing and working out what the harmony was supposed to be at that point and arguing about everything. Everything was an argument, but it was still creative.
Creative.
Um, and we basically, I mean, we're still in touch. We still get together and still pick out our old stuff. And you know, I see it as like it was the first big collaboration of my musical life. And um, and we have now started releasing on Spotify some of those old tracks under the name of Rothman and Jacobs. So he's the Rothman, I'm the Jacobs, and there's tons of stuff that we're trying to gradually get out to see the light of day. So that's like a side project. So that carried on for a very long time. In that time, actually, we even wrote and recorded a musical, which took up a load of time and was a bit of a, I would say, possibly a bit of a, a white elephant, a bit of a red herring. But all useful stuff. So we were quite ambitious, although not very much end result, I think we can say. And
So
then
the musical never been performed. It's never
not
been
really, no, and
released,
no,
published.
no, and it just hadn't, and it had never seen the light of day. Then, then yes, this musical collaborator, my a good friend, he moved to Israel actually. So I was then left alone at home and thinking, well, is that the end then? Is that it? And for a while, I think I just mourned the death of this collaboration, and then eventually, around 2017, I thought I can do this myself if I go and get the right equipment. And the funny thing is, I bought the cheapest microphone. I didn't even trust myself to go on to Logic. I downloaded GarageBand, which is
Yeah.
like for £1
Yes.
99. And and so I started because I wasn't sure if I could make anything work on my own, and then bit by bit, with sort of 6 months later, I sort of promoted myself to Logic with a better microphone, a proper keyboard, and bit by bit I built up, a studio. Then actually in this house I did some renovation eventually, gave myself a little studio space. That was a breakthrough, and that happened just before COVID. So I'd started doing my own music, then COVID struck, and through I was so grateful that I was here in my new little studio, and now it didn't matter too much if I was left alone for days and days and days because I just had plenty to do. So I just wrote and wrote and wrote,
Mm.
um, and it was really useful. At the same time, I met very randomly a guy in this area who also was a songwriter who wanted to come and use my studio because he'd written something. So he came and he did the thing that he'd written. And then we got chatting and thought, well, that went well. Should we have another go? And eventually that became a songwriting partnership. So there's a second songwriting partnership with much younger guy with a very good voice. He does the singing. We write stuff together, and that's much more R&B. It sounds more youthful.
Yes.
It's 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 great, and and the whole thing about a collaboration, which I think is really interesting, is it, a collaboration is meant to, I think, make you do stuff that you wouldn't do by yourself. I mean, that must be the purpose. Otherwise, what's the point? And
It
it's
extends. It extends, it challenges and creates the opportunity for unlocking ideas or skills that you didn't know you had before necessarily.
absolutely, and so the writing is different,
Mm.
the the production is different, um, and although, I'm doing those things, I'm checking in with him all the time. Is this okay? Do you mind if I put this on? And sometimes he'll say, no, 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 that's not okay. You go, no, that's not going to work. And I'm, okay, I'll take it off. And so that it's a good, toing and froing partnership, um, and really valuable. So just winding back, I sort of went solo in about 2017. And as you can probably see from Spotify, I think I'm now on album. I'm just about to start releasing singles from my eighth album, and that just seems mad. Actually, I can hardly believe that I'm saying that. And I've sort of um, every album that I've released has 12 tracks. I seem to be
Yeah.
locked into this thing. They must have 12 tracks. They must be about sort of the whole thing must be sort of 45 to 50 minutes. What I do notice is when I look back on my earlier albums, the songs are longer, so they've got shorter because of
Yes.
Spotify, and all the introductions have gone because of Spotify, which I sort of regret, but I don't mind trying to structure what I do into that format. It's a challenge, and I
Yes.
think it's a worthwhile challenge. But um, so everything's got a little bit shorter, a little bit punchier, and at the same time, I've been learning the guitar so that I can add guitar to the sound, and that's been also really helpful. So keyboard, and I've got an electric guitar and a nice acoustic guitar, and that's really helpful, really useful.